Hey y'all, and welcome to another Nerdy Reviews. I'm your host, Zaku, and today we're going to be reviewing Mobile Suit Victory Gundam. Now, before I begin with anything here, let me just give you a quick little thing here. If you haven't already and you're watching this on Twitch, follow me on my Twitch channel. If you are watching this on YouTube, make sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and then leave me a comment down below. I want to hear from you guys what you guys think about the series or my opinions on the series, that sort of thing. I do love responding to you guys, so please leave a comment down below. And then if you want to keep up to when I'm going live or other things I post at times too, follow me on my Twitter account. My Twitter account, I basically post when I go live, what I'm reviewing next, and random things here and there. That being said, let's go ahead and begin with the review here. So, Mobile Suit Victory Gundam is a pretty interesting one here. I got quite a bit to say about it too, and some of the things I want to, not say what I'm going to say anyways. Okay. Let's just get to the nitty-gritty first, and let's just give you guys the idea of what the story about Mobile Suit Gundam, or Mobile Suit Victory Gundam. So, the story basically takes place many years later. So we last left off was on Gundam F91. With F91 here, it was Universal Century 0123. So with Victory Gundam, we have another time skip. Basically, in the Universal Century of 0153, a young boy by the name of Uso and his friends are dragged into joining up with the League Militaire when the Zanskar Empire makes their move to invade Earth. So that's the basic gist of the story here. It is ever evolving, and is quite a feat what it does in the series, how it kind of changes around. Although the same conflict, the main conflict is there, but it constantly changes. So I just want to point out some really fun facts about this series. So this series came out in 1993, and it is written and directed by Yoshiyuki Tomino. So he comes back and he returns again to write and direct another series. And funny enough though, and this is weird when I say this, but it's been 6 years from that time frame since he's last done an actual series. Keep that in mind that his last project that he had worked on was F91 2 years prior in 1991, and then Char's Counterattack back in 1988. So before then, he had last worked on a series which ended in 1988, which was Double Zeta Gundam. So it's nice to see that he does come back, and with full force, I want to say. I say full force because this is one of those infamous Kill 'Em All Tomino series. Definitely, Victory Gundam is one of the more darker, and I would say even bleaker series or entries into the Gundam franchise. I would dare say one of the most. There's a couple in my mind that come up to me right now, like Iron-Blooded Orphans, Zeta Gundam, but this one really does take the cake of how bleak and dark it can get. And it really shows in case in point with Tomino's depression. So another some level of side fun factor too is that whenever Tomino's depressed, he writes some of the best stuff. Basically, when he's happy, he doesn't write anything good. Double Zeta. But you look outside that one when he's depressed or he's like moderately depressed, he writes some really good stuff. This one here, from what I can understand, with the production of Victory Gundam, he was going through a depressive route again. And the depression wasn't so much so on his end too, but also what was going on with the companies that he was working with. At this point in 1993, Sunrise and Bandai were merging together. And this merger had caused a lot of rifts for Tomino himself. I will elaborate a little bit more on that, but just to capsize it, it mainly deals with how the starter of this series begins with, how we are introduced with the Gundam very first, like the first thing in the series, and then introduction of vehicle-based designs, and yeah, I wouldn't be depressed about it, but man, they're very gaudy, awful things. So, I do want to say that this is not my first time watching Victory Gundam. This is actually my second time watching Victory Gundam. This did come out, I want to say 2017, 2016, I could be wrong, when Right Stuff got the licensing rights from Bandai Sunrise to release this in the States finally. I had seen some episodes in the past, but not by a whole lot. My knowledge about Victory Gundam was very, very scant. But the episodes that I had saw was pretty dour, pretty sad. And yeah, that really comes full force with the full 51 episodes this series is. At the time, this is one of the longer Gundam series to watch. And man, it is very long. And at times drags on, and I'll elaborate on that too. When I first watched this too, I apologize at the time too. I wasn't really paying too much attention to the series. I could vaguely remember when I came back to it now, rewatching it now years later. The series was very much what I can remember is this. It was very actiony, very depressing. A lot of people died, and I really hated Katagina. That was the things I remember about the series. I couldn't remember about really beyond the plot I just described to you guys about the whole Zanskar Empire invasion and stuff like that. I really couldn't remember beyond that. I couldn't remember like what happened at the very end of the series or anything in the middle, really. But I remember certain aspects of the plot and some of the characters, and I think it's just the bad things. You tend to remember the bad things more than you remember the good. So with that said, I was glad to finally come back to watching V Gundam because I did give it a terrible score long time ago. So I came into this with kind of like, kind of wincing. I mean, we just watched a bunch of good movies. I mean, like, I would say mediocre, but they're good movies, right? A lot of 3 out of 5s. We came off of, like, Unicorn Gundam, which was a 5 out of 5. Last movie I just watched, which was F91, 4 out of 5. So V Gundam was kind of like getting me a little bit antsy of like, oh man, am I going to come across another dud? I don't remember. I didn't like Victory Gundam. So those were my first impressions when I had first watched it. This time around, it's going to be a little bit different. So I kind of want to start off with, just the traditional things I generally start off with. And I want to show you guys some stuff too. Something a little bit different than what I normally do, or you've seen in my previous reviews. So first things I want to talk about this series too is that there is no returning characters. So like I mentioned before with F91, F91 took place in 0123 of Universal Century. We had a 30-year time skip at that point. So any characters at this point from previous Gundam entries are either super old or dead at this point. The whole conflict that happened in F91 ends. Let me just scoot ahead here. I'm just going to put it on here. The conflict with F91 ended for the most part. If you follow the novel, the manga for Crossbone Gundam, all of that concludes, and now we're in this new era. So we're starting fresh here. Brand new characters, brand new suits, nothing rehashed. So that's a really key point I really want to bring up to you guys, is that this is new. Everything's new. Don't need to really jump into a whole lot. So when it comes to the animation with Victory Gundam, it's not terribly bad. Right, I'm giving you an example. It doesn't look super fantastic here. It's kind of flushed out with the colors and kind of bland, not too detaily, you would say, right? But this is like a quick action sequence. But a good example of the animation here, I would say, is like right about here. Really, really nice, like coloring and so forth. So like it's hard for me to say when it gets good or not, because like you get like really nice looking detail shots like this or animation, and then at times when you get earlier, this is like one of the earlier episodes too, and kind of comes out like that. It's not terribly that bad, but the animation is very much that 90s-esque, early 90s-esque Gundam, not movie though. Like I mentioned with F91, like details like this, if you imagine the suit was further out, it would be more blurred out and so forth. Where F91, where suits would be, even if they're far away, they would still maintain a lot of their details on them. We get the same thing with our characters. I think my best one I will have here is like this. This is some of our character animation here. This is more or less kind of like it. Just imagine a little bit more flush with the colors, not too contrasty. There are moments when it does get really contrasty and looks actually nice. But again, overall animation, not bad at all. It's very enjoyable, very pleasant. one thing that's really key about Victory Gundam is the music. A lot of the music is this somber, sorrowful kind of music, but has a little bit of that triumphant or like hopeful tone to it. Really establishes a lot of the tones and themes that we see within Victory Gundam, and encapsulates this very strong atmosphere of like, it's like sad, but there's hope. It's depressing, but optimistic. And that's the best way I could really describe the music. I wish I could play you examples of the music. Of course, Twitch and YouTube are not fond of people playing music that is not of their own, so I apologize. But I recommend trying to find the music yourself. Listen to it, because some of the combat music, the character dialogue type music, really hits home or hits key with a lot of moments in this series. I feel like a lot of this series is guided by this music at times. Although a lot of times the music can be overdone, but never does it lose its touch or its emphasis on what's going on. That's something I really want to talk about when it came to the music. Now, I did talk about some good things, and I really want to talk about some of the bad things right now. So I got a lot to say, but I really want to talk about. Usually, I try to keep that towards the end or something like that, or in between it. But with Victory Gundam, it's very unique, I feel. So the one big issue I had with Victory Gundam is the pacing. I feel like it's the Achilles heel of this entire series. I'm talking about this first because I have so many good things to talk about this series, but I don't want to keep rehashing the same points over and over about why this series is bad. So I'm going to encapsulate right here for you guys. Pacing is bad. Oftentimes the series, it has multiple arcs from within, a lot of character development, but the problem with it at times, and I feel with Tomino at this point, is that he kind of drags things out at times. Where we could really just have moved along and not had worried about certain aspects of what's going on in the story or the plot, or what's going on with our characters and their development. I felt like we could have just moved along. So a lot of times, either when we're transitioning over to another arc, it just kind of drags its knuckles across the floor. It takes a while for it to take off or go into the next direction. Likewise with our characters too. Sometimes the character development just drags on or takes a little bit of time to get there. And sometimes it's not even a good payoff to begin with. I'm going to jump towards my next portion here, and it's with certain character motivations or mannerisms, behaviors really are frustrating, or you don't get a whole idea, like a good idea about who they are. Three particular characters come into my mind, and they really drive me nuts throughout the entire series. We have Shakti, which is our main protagonist's, I would confidently say, love interest, basically. Although he kind of views her like a little sister, there seems to be a little more attention, and of course they are very young too, and that's something I'll also talk about. But Shakti tends to be a little of an annoying character for me at times, which follows up with two other characters here, one I've already mentioned, but Chronicle, who is our Char clone of the series. I want to talk about a fun fact about him too, and Katajina. Now, all three of these characters, they're prominently shown throughout the entire series. Katajina and Chronicle kind of disappear at times, and they come back. But the main problem I have with all three of them is like their character motivations, mannerisms, or behaviors. Shakti, oftentimes, she's against, fighting in the war, doesn't like what it's doing to Uso, for an example. But what's frustrating about her and what kind of drags along the pacing of the story, too, I can't even count it on my hand anymore. I've lost count after 5, literally. Shakti has a habit throughout the entire series of either getting captured or surrendering herself to Bespa or Zanskar forces. And for your reference, Bespa is basically like the special forces within the Zanskar Empire. So that was a really critical issue I had with Shakti. A lot of times, the first couple of times makes sense, but the later ones do not make sense at all, and it creates more frustration. She would often try to give herself up, or she gets captured or allows herself to get captured because she wants to try and talk to Chronicle to convince him or change what's going on. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Relina Peacecraft from Gundam Wing, but not as bad. Because Shakti ends up becoming used more like a pawn or a piece of like a hostage, and creates more issues later on. And I feel like after having conversations with Chronicle and stuff like that, you would realize it at this point that this is not a person you're going to be able to rationalize with or convince at this point, or try to talk to other people to. I don't know why you're still trying this, so it's confusing when you had other characters who are involved with each other and they like pick up on this. Shakti's picked up on several other characters too, but doesn't pick up on this, and it just kind of gets frustrating. You could almost argue like, yes, she wants to be that, like, kind of like with the tone of the series, like it's somber, sad, but she's got this hopeful resilience to her. But it really drives me nuts when it comes to the story and the dragging of the plot. Multiple times, by the way. It's beyond 5. I've lost count at 5, okay? She gets kidnapped, captured, surrenders herself, gets kidnapped again, surrenders herself. I lost count after 5. Multiple times in the series. Characters like Chronicle, who is our very first Char clone in a series. Now, last we talked about Char clones, we actually had our first movie Char clone in the form of Kuroso or Iron Mask in F91. In the chronological time or actual releases, not timeline releases, because other than that, we would had Zoltan. Sorry, old joke. But with these characters, like with for example, with Iron Mask, as I had brought up, or Kuroso, he had more defining features. You know, a Char clone again is exhibiting primarily the physical aspects of a Char clone is, of course, wearing a mask. Chronicle tends to wear like a not like a ski mask. I forgot what they're called specifically, but it's like a little like cloth mask that he keeps pulling on and off. He takes it off from time to time. I'm like, never explained why he wears that mask. Then again, never really need to know the reason why they wear a mask, but still. Context within the series, at least with Kuroso, he wears the Iron Mask, and it's very depictive of his character and his mannerisms, like a machine or a cold-hearted person. But Chronicle constantly wearing this mask, it did not make any sense whatsoever, or why he wears it. Not like he's trying to hide himself, that he's the Queen's brother and stuff like that. It really doesn't make sense. So that's something that's kind of frustrating with him. Alongside with that too, he's probably what I would consider one of the weaker Char clones. Zoltan might be a good example of a weak Char clone himself, but nothing compares to Chronicle. Chronicle in this series, he reminds me a lot like Jared from Zeta Gundam, where he is primarily just an antagonist for Uso. That's it. He doesn't really play off to a lot of Char, like any of the charisma. He has some of the charisma Char, but not like too much of the charisma Char, or having ideals, or trying to work towards something, or scheming. He does. This is how much scheming he does, like very, very little, and it's all talk, really. It never amounts to anything. So he just feels like a glorified grunt a lot of times. We do get him in a red mobile suit at the very end of the series, which is kind of cool. But other than that, he's a very big disappointment of a character. Doesn't have any much aspirations, and his motives of what he does doesn't make sense. Not too much of a spoiler, because they don't really do much with it. He complains that, like, I'm always in the shadow of my sister, blah, 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 blah. He kind of alludes that that's the reason why he wears a mask, but then he takes it on and off. And people know who he is, so then what's the point? It doesn't make sense, a lot of what Chronicle does. So he was a disappointing Char clone. And he just adds on to the frustration of, like, you kind of want him to do something more. And he never does. He never amounts to anything really amazing. Other than being a big pain for Uso. Katagina is another character that drove me nuts. She does not make sense a lot of times of what she does. And she's very flippant. Coming off like, oh, I'm a good guy, oh, I'm a bad guy, oh, I'm a good guy, I'm a bad guy, and we don't know where she truly sits. And by the end of this series, because the way that the series crescendos too, finally defines what she is, but it didn't make sense, like how things led up to her being that way at all. Doesn't make sense whatsoever. That said, I feel like Katagina was probably more annoying. Like, okay, Shakti drags the plot along, that she ranks up pretty high there in frustration of what hampers down the series. Chronicle is just a disappointment. He doesn't really do anything much beyond that. Just like Jared. He should be a Jared clone than a Char clone. And then we have Katagina, who is a flippant ghost. She's like there, but she's not there. She does stuff, but it doesn't really matter. It only really matters like midway through onwards, but I mean, like, Because I just feel like a lot of these characters were just like disappointments. They dragged on because their screen time, they get a lot of screen time, and it just drags on. Drags on. But those are, and I want to emphasize that those are big key points of what's disappointing about this series or what makes this series bad, because these are not main cast, but main, you know, of course we have Uso as the main character, and then we have the main cast, and they are part of the main cast. They drag on the series. They drag on. And with those three characters, those three particular points really emphasize, and again, I'm not trying to spoil too much, but really drags on. But what makes the series actually really good, though, and I got a lot to tell you about. This is the good stuff. So, first and foremost, and I kind of want to just go back to a previous shot here. Yeah, here we go. Is the action. Almost every single episode. It's, I wouldn't say like non-stop action, but it's constant action throughout every single series. Really good mesh. Tomino, again, does a good mesh between dialogue, character development, story, plot, and then the action. And you got a good half and half between, like, I'm not going to say 15 minutes, but like 10 minutes of each, right? And those 10 minutes are interspliced with each other very, very well, in my opinion. The fight sequences are exciting and fun. Sometimes they are drawn out. You wonder why they're done that way, but they're a lot of fun. One thing that makes the fighting really, really fun, though, is Uso's utilization of the Victory Gundam. So, as you can kind of see right here, and then right here, so here's the Victory Gundam itself. Let me blow it up for you guys a little bit. Victory Gundam itself. And then, you know, from what you can see in this image, it's a core fighter based suit. And they call, like, you know, the upper torso, and then they call the boots, and then you have the core fighter, right? Uso has a very unique fighting style, utilizing a lot of the mechanics with the core fighter we've never seen previously in other series. We get kind of close to it at times, but not by a whole lot. The G armor was very gimmicky. The closest one I could say that's very similar to this would be like the Gundam Mark II with the G Defensor in Zeta Gundam, because they have to transform and they fight, but we don't get like a whole lot between that. But Uso comes up with some really crazy and unique techniques, such as like splitting away from the Gundam to avoid shots or getting killed, utilizing portions of it, like launching the upper torso or the boots into like battleships and carriers to destroy them, launching his bits and his parts to distract or escape from enemies, utilizing multiple parts to attack on multiple fronts on enemies. So it's very interesting. He makes, I mean, I'm not a fan at all of core fighters, but he makes it so much fun to watch. It's very interesting and entertaining, and seeing the many different ways that Uso fights in a core fighter. A lot of times, like the core fighter, it's like annoying because they're like, oh man, what can it do? It's got only machine guns and it zips around, can't really do a whole lot. But he makes usage of that very, very well. So do the other pilots, because they all bite off. Literally, they all bite off of Uso. They go like, man, that's a really good idea, Uso. I want to use that, and that's what happens. Also, the attention to realism in the series. Of course, just like any other Gundam series, it is based on realism for the most part. I mean, it's an anime with giant robots. It's kind of hard to base on something. But this series has a lot more attention to it, and it goes alongside with the themes that they try to cover. What we usually see in the core themes of a Gundam in the Gundam franchise. Primarily, what we come to is that a lot of times, even with the action, they don't try to do kill shots. In fact, the only thing that they would try and do, for the most part, is either disable the suits or kill the pilot in the cockpit. And they would avoid trying to destroy the suit whatsoever. It goes with the idea of, like, they don't want to pollute the Earth, and avoiding that nuclear reaction explosion when a suit is destroyed. And when suits do get destroyed, they do get destroyed, by the way, later on, too. Those explosions are horrifically fantastic. They are not exaggerated, but it feels like it's going back to the original roots, like almost the very first episode of the original Gundam, where when a Zaku explodes, it's catastrophic. It does all this damage and creates all this hassle and so forth. So it's like, wow, it's really amazing, and a lot of that attention to the detail of, like, hey, we want to preserve the environment, or like, hey, we want to make sure that we don't destroy, like, damage the colonies or something of that nature. We got to be careful. And because of that, it makes the fights a lot more vicious, a lot more desperate is a key word I like to use too. So I think that plays really towards the non-stop action in a sense. I also like a lot of, like, how some of the weapons worked. Like, a lot of times with the beam sabers in particular, because they're, like, a lot of times when we see beam sabers in the previous series, they're, like, their form is, like, complete. This is on the V2, though, because of the way that it's subbed. A lot of the other beam sabers, it'd be more like a finer point. If you had watched Gundam Hathaway, or maybe I think F91 does it at times too, where it looks more like a beam light coming out rather than like this full force thing, like these, like not like an unstable beam saber or lightsaber from like Star Wars. So it's very, very interesting how they pay attention to, like, it's a beam saber, but it's got its points, it's got its not limitations. I would say we haven't seen that necessarily, but what it does in reality's sake. So those are some examples I want to talk about when it comes to the realism, when it comes to the suits, at least. Of course, we got other realism, such as, like, damages towards the ships or environments and stuff like that, how it impacts the people. So yeah. Another fun one, and I mentioned it before too, this is another Kill 'Em All Tomino series. I do have to say that Victory Gundam, wow, if I thought that the original Gundam and Zeta Gundam were like Game of Thrones, compares to nothing like Victory Gundam. Oh man. The body count in Victory Gundam is ridiculously high on both sides. It is by far one of the most shocking, like some of the deaths can be incredibly shocking and but very gruesome. In the very first episode of this series, like several minutes into the series, you are literally greeted with a city of dead people, just bodies laying everywhere in horrific depictions too. It really set the tone for the series right off the bat. So yes, this series has the highest kill count, in my opinion, in the Gundam franchise. I don't think anything really comes close to what it is. And I'm not saying, like, by means of, like, random deaths here and there. I'm talking just about the main casting characters primarily, because those are ones, no offense to the people that are dying and whatnot, but, like, those are the ones that we're more concerned or caring about. There's our main cast and crew. And a lot of people die in this series. A lot. I do also want to say that this series has one of, if not the worst, parental death I have ever seen in the entire Gundam franchise. I think that one got me a little liquid pridey. There's no pride in that at all. It is just sad. It is just sad and depressing, and I'm like, wow, you don't get that much more broken than that. Uh, yeah, it's pretty rough. So again, this series with a high death rate and so forth, again fits with that very somber, very depressing, very tragic tone throughout the entire series. I do want to say that in the very first episode, though, like I kind of mentioned with the City of Death, though, this is also what led to one of Tomino's depressions too. It was his lack of ability of controlling the production. One of the things that Bandai Sunrise wanted to do after the merger, when they were producing Victory Gundam, was they didn't want to wait for the Gundam. Tomino has a tendency to drag out the story or whatnot, or sometimes we see the titular Gundam. Zeta Gundam is a good example of that one. ZZ is another good example of that one. So with the Bandai Sunrise merger, rather than waiting out on Tomino to introduce the Gundam to the audience at a much later time frame, they're like, no, Tomino, you are putting the Gundam in the very first episode. We're not going to wait however long you want us to wait for us to see the Gundam. We want it now. So that caused a little bit of a rift for Tomino, and I don't know if it would further impact it, but it impact other things too, which when we get to the favorite suit segment. But that was the first thing that kind of kicks it off. So our very first episode, and it kind of goes with that pacing too. The very first episode is the fourth episode, and then every sequential episode up to the fourth, and a little bit after the fourth too, I would say up to the fifth or sixth, is mostly like a flashback of like Uso or Shakti recalling what events had transpired, and then we're trying to catch up. By the time we catch up to episode 4, we're now seeing redone like recaps of the very first episode. So it's kind of like, it kind of throws things off. Yeah, we get to see the Victory Gundam and what it can kind of do, but it really throws things off. And I felt like maybe if they just left Tomino alone and let him like, hey, do your thing, and told the story in a linear path rather than this weird Quentin Tarantino-esque. I hate referring back to Quentin Tarantino in a negative fashion, but he does do some of his movies in a non-linear fashion, a la Pulp Fiction. So that's something I would always point out. I was like, if you just stood, some movies and shows work great if you do a non-linear thing. Sometimes they don't. Here's a fantastic example of why you don't want to, why you want to stay on the treaded path rather than try and mix and match the path, right? You create a very disjointed very beginning when you could have told a very more thorough story without having to do all these stupid little flashbacks and kind of throw people off or make it a lot less interesting. I do have to say, though, the first several episodes were a little bit hard to get into after the first episode, because the first episode just like drops you into the action, drops you into everything. So yeah, I totally get it, but it would have been a nice ramp up rather than this weird like inverted ramp and stuff like that, where you get all the action and now we have to rebuild back everything up. So you see what I mean? Like the pacing is a little bit off too, even in the very beginning. Let me get to my next point. What makes this series really good was that it has a lot of fitting series and core elements that you find throughout the entire Gundam franchise. In fact, I think this series utilizes almost every single one of them and emphasizes on several of them like heavily. One of the more prominent themes that we started seeing, like going Zeta Gundam onward, and not too much on some of the movies, is, of course, we have our child pilots and stuff like that, so we have children being used as tools of war, and then we also have women used as tools of war. Victory Gundam makes a huge emphasis on this. I mean, countless times, people would find out that Uso is the pilot, and they would just feel like utter garbage. You see the despair in them, and it's like, have we really gotten to this point where we are sending children to fight in a war, to fight for us? And it's just like they keep hammering this home really hard. They do the same thing with women, but not, it's a little bit of a sexist thing too, but at the same time though, they are trying to, they tie it in there with another theme that becomes more prevalent, which is the whole, where we got with the whole fathers passing their sins to their children that we see years later in Unicorn Gundam, Victory Gundam capitalizes on mothers and their children. And so they try to go about the whole similar path to what Unicorn Gundam does. So I would want to say, and I wish I can go back to Unicorn Gundam because I watch everything in that, the universal chronological time frame, though, is that Unicorn Gundam paid respect to Victory Gundam. And they told an opposite ends, where Victory Gundam is all about matriarchy, about motherhood, about women being mothers or foregoing their motherhood too. You get that with Unicorn Gundam about fathers, the sins of our fathers, the abilities or what our fathers or our parents want to pass down to their generation. Victory Gundam capitalized on this first. So we see a lot of prevalent themes. We have a huge cast of women in this series. From Queen Maria of the Zanskar Empire, Marbet and the lovely ladies of the Strike Team. We even have it with Shakti to an example too. And this is another point I'll bring up too. It's about generations, and that'll be my last one here. But we see a lot about mothers, would-be mothers, or women in general. How are they bringing about changes towards the future? What are they providing towards the next generation? What are the mothers giving to their children? And what are women that are not mothers trying to give towards children that are not of their own or towards the next generation? It's very prevalent. A great examples would be like when Uso and the gang meet Fuala and at the Zanskar Side 2 bar. Marbet and her relationship with Uso, Uso and his mother, and Maria with Shakti. You got also with the Strike Team too. A lot of the other women that we see within the Zanskar Empire too. Even Katarzyna to some extent as well. So it brings a lot of these themes that clash and gel with each other, and I think it really emphasizes a lot of this. We do see some of these themes previously, like in Zeta Gundam. We get very small amounts of it in the original Gundam, like Char Lala, at times Mirai and Sayla, and very little of it too in Double Zeta Gundam. We do see it in Char's counterattack with Nanai and Char, but it's so much more prevalent and throughout the entire series. It's very encapsulating from beginning to end with Victory Gundam. So I think that was such a fantastic touch to it. A theme that we see throughout the entire Gundam franchise, but not really delved into. And Victory Gundam was the first to establish that respect to matriarchy, respect to motherhood, respect to women. And then we get later on the same thing with Unicorn Gundam, but the opposite, but in this case for fathers, for men, that sort of thing. So I think they're really nice complementary series to each other in a sense. Last one I want to talk about in themes too that we see prevalent in the Gundam series is the generational giving, right? Just like how we are as human beings, we want to pass on our traits, our abilities, our behaviors, our traditions to the next generation. Victory Gundam is very much so into this. And it's very prevalent, especially with the cast too, where we have a lot of older people too and a younger cast. Like, we have the three generations. We have the old generation, mid-generation, youth generation. Most of our characters that we do follow are the youth generation. And I will talk about that in a little bit too, but very much so, we see about how, and that's why a lot of these characters oh my god, Uso's fighting in the Victory Gundam? I'm fighting against a child? Why is a child fighting in a mobile suit? Has the war gotten this bad where we have to use children now? This is awful. Or they would twist that around a little bit, oh my god, the League Militaire is using children to fight? How disgusting. And you get these different ideologies, these different thoughts on this, but it's ever so prevalent with those thoughts too, especially with the former that I mentioned, not the latter one, is that they is this what we're passing on to our children? Are we turning them into weapons of war rather than try to have them raised and nurtured to bring a better future. This is what we're giving to them. The series really does such a great job of tooling around that, and really playing with those themes constantly throughout the entire series. I don't want to get into too much detail about it because, again, I don't want to spoil things. So I do apologize for being very broad in what I'm describing here, but I'm giving you those themes at least. And what makes this very, very a solid watch. My brain's kind of derping. I feel like I want to say a little bit more about that too. And that whole old generation wanting to give to the younger generation, or let the younger generation finally take reign about what they can do in their lives and not being told what to do, right? Again, comes portion to that crescendo at the very end of the series. And so what I want to talk about that last part of the series, so the last 10 episodes and the final episode are fantastic. Albeit it does get a little bit weird. We do deal with new types, but it's not to the same levels that we have seen in previous Gundam series. It doesn't get that out there. It does get weird, though. Not super weird, just makes it more like nonsensical kind of a weird. And it loses a lot of its realism at that point. But other than that, and of course, character motivations and some of the pacing gets kind of dragged out. It doesn't make sense. But other than that, the action and everything that's being brought up throughout those 10 episodes, and the final, too. Fantastic. Great watch. That being said, too, I do want to say this series is, I want to say, both a spiritual successor and a redemption. So I brought up F91 a couple of times earlier on, and the reason why I say that is that I feel like what Victory Gundam is the spiritual successor to F91 as a series. Remember that F91 wasn't originally a movie. It was a television series with its own planned 50-episode series, like 50 episodes, right? That got canned and turned into a movie instead, for whatever the reason. Similar things that you find in F91, you can find in Victory Gundam. Child-based cast. They are forced into a warlike position. Oh, that's kind of similar with all Gundam series for the most part. But child-based cast, they are not incredibly annoying, which is that redemption part. You kind of got like strung in forces that are trying to fight against this invading empire. Casmo Babylonia / Crossbone Vanguard, and then you also have Zanskar Empire / the Bespa forces. So, kind of similar. A lot of tonalities too. They were both trying to be very serious and try to tell their own kind of thing. Sans there's a little bit of royalty in this too. I'm not gonna say it's like, but there's a little bit of royalty here. Not played as much as it is in F91, but Victory Gundam does have its royalty portions. But it feels very much like what F91 could have been if it was made into a full-fledged series, I feel. Sans, a sequel or whatnot. And the redemption here is that the series, that this is a child-based cast. So, if you don't already know or you can't tell already, Uso is one of the, if not the youngest protagonist in the entire Gundam franchise. Or at least in the UC century, because I know we have some younger Gundam protagonists, but Uso's very young. He's a 13-year-old that pilots a Gundam, so that says it is. Where Judo and Camille were like 16, 15, or 15, 16, I can't remember respectively. Same thing with Amuro. Uso is 13. He's the youngest protagonist. All his friends are slightly older than him, maybe like a year or two, but we have primarily a child-based cast. And unlike Double Zeta, this is where I'm saying here's the redemption, is that Tomino learned, I'm assuming he learned his lessons from Double Zeta, and he made the entire cast tolerable, even more than tolerable, actually likable too. I actually like a lot of the child-based characters. Odello, at times, he comes off a little bit like Bicha-esque, but he really does care about Uso and tries to be kind of like a bigger brother to him. when the Highland kids come in there. So you got Tomas, and then Martina, and I forgot her sister's name too. They all play very pivotal parts. Tomas becomes a pilot himself alongside with Odello. Susie, who's really, really young, isn't an annoying little kid. She actually plays pivotal into joining alongside with Shakti in her adventures when she gets kidnapped and stuff like that. And even Carlin, or baby Carl, as much as he cries and whines from time to time, is not that annoying actually. And he plays. Everyone plays a very vital part in this series. So, unlike some of the characters in Double Zeta Gundam, where they were very obnoxious, annoying, non-stop, stupid, lame jokes, we do get very small moments of jokes with our cast here. But they are so adult, almost. They do have their, childish tendencies though, but it's not to the levels of where it got beyond annoying or ridiculous. Saying certain things like what I mentioned with Shakti, for an example. Some other things I want to mention too, and he's right there too, Haro. Haro is actually a viable character in this series. Usually Haro is, just a mascot within the Gundam franchise. Shows up in a lot of Gundam series. Doesn't really do a whole lot, and people just love to punt him around the ship, basically, right? Though Haro does get punted or tossed a couple of times in this series, Haro's really, really, really useful in this series. Stupid useful. And in fact, several times he's basically saved our cast and crew. So that says a whole lot, and Haro does a lot. He's really, really cool in this series. And as much as you go like Haro, kind of like that stuff, I think, you know what? Redemption for Haro in Victory Gundam. I can't speak for any other Gundam series, though. Alongside with Haro, too, another fun thing about this series is that, the in-betweens, like for the commercial breaks, right? You have that little, closer towards the commercials, and then the opener from the commercials, right? Usually it's like a still with a little of a sound clip, right? And then, of course, the title of the series. Victory Gundam does something a little bit different in that every single in-between, or stopgap, right? I want to call them stopgaps. It's a little kind of like an animation, so it's like a still animation that constantly changes every single episode. And what it is, it's like a little, kind of like a flip book animation between Haro and their dog, Shakti's and Uso's dog, Flanders. So I thought that was kind of cool. I've never seen this in any other Gundam series ever. It's kind of neat. I wish I did kind of took pictures of it and then I could show you guys that. I never really thought about doing that. But maybe I'll do that in the future just for fun so people can see this, because it was kind of a cool one. Another first I want to talk about, too, in this series, that this is the first series that actually has a recap episode. Now, people go like, Zaku, what do you mean? I thought Double Zeta Gundam, you said that that had the first recap episode. I'm like, it did. But Double Zeta's first episode, which was a recap, it was a franchise recap episode, not like a traditional recap episode. If you ever watch anime and I tell you like, oh man, it was a recap episode, you know exactly what I mean, where it's going to recap like the last like 15 to 10 episodes. Sometimes has sometimes new animation, sometimes no new animation whatsoever, and it's just a recap. Victory Gundam has 2 recap episodes, and the first one comes in episode 17. I don't remember the second one, but it was the first time I've ever seen in any of the Gundam series thus far. And considering that Victory Gundam was, I can't remember, I'm not going to try and count it at this point here, but it's one of the earlier ones, because at this point here with the Gundam franchise, we are now getting to the new, like, mid to newer stuff. Victory Gundam was towards the tail end, and now we're going to see a lot of newer stuff. With the mid-90s block, like G Gundam, Gundam Wing, Gundam X, right? But beforehand, everything's, even though I watched things out of real-time chronological order, up until that point, though, from like the original Gundam up to Victory Gundam, there has not been a recap episode. So Victory Gundam features that one, and it is exactly how I describe it to be. And from episode 17, it recaps 1 through 16, and it does have some newer footage because it's like Queen Maria is being explained the events that had transpired so far. And we get some information that kind of leads to like foreshadowing for the future, but not by a whole lot. And then there was another episode later on that's another recap episode, very similar to. But I just want to notate that was the very first one, at least from what I've noticed so far, of a recap episode. One other thing I want to talk about too. Now, at this time in 1993, this was the last in the Universal Century. For almost 6 years, there was no other new entries to the Universal Century. This was the last Gundam in the Universal Century, with enough time skipping and jumping where all of our previous characters from previous UC Century stories are either long dead or incredibly old. This series was trying to, what I felt like was almost like a earlier version of a Unicorn Gundam, and try to encapsulate everything and close the book on the Universal Century, right? And just how like the original Gundam starts off, and it's not a dour, but like it's sad, it's tragic, because it's a war and all that jazz. The ending of Victory Gundam, it remains so consistent with the atmosphere and the themes and the tones of the series. And it's a very somber ending. I'm not going to give too much spoilers about that, but it's a very somber ending. And I bring this up because I feel like, because as of right now, bless you, Nero. I believe that was Nero that sneezed. Yep, they're fighting up there. I barely see them. You can see them right there. Sorry. But this is the last in the Universal Century. Because our next one that we're going to be coming up to, which I will be reviewing next for G Savior, this really encapsulates everything about Gundam. And the way that Gundam began, it ends in a very similar way. Very somber, optimistic, but somber, dour. A lot of people have died. We've lost a lot of characters, and towards the very end, we lose a lot of key cast members. So this is one of those games where you want to play where it's like, I'm like, who? It makes me think back to the original Gundam. Who will survive, right? And it's one of those shockers in a sense. So I think the ending of Victory Gundam, the way it ends off and how it closes the book on the Universal Century, animation-wise, and I'm going to say that too, is very poignant. Fits so well with the entire Gundam franchise. And I think you guys are having fun watching my cats fight. Because as much as, Gundam's all about war, and while we think that it's going to close off, war never ends, truly. And we're always going to get conflicts. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our next segment that I like to go over, which is my favorite suits of the series. And for those of you that don't know about this, though, so every single Gundam franchise, every single Gundam series, movies, introduces a bunch of brand new suits, redesigns, new vehicles, and so forth. That stuff, basically. Victory Gundam is no different, and in fact is another one of those prime examples of a series that everything is just brand new. So we have a slew of newer suits for both sides. First thing I do want to talk about, though, is the second thing that made Tomino really depressed about the series, and what is also another frustrating, not frustrating, it's just an aspect of the series that I just do not like. So, when Bandai and Sunrise merged, and when they were producing Victory Gundam, they wanted to do something a little bit different. They wanted to add more features for like battleships and vehicles or whatnot, just so they can have more stuff to sell, essentially, not just the mobile suits and Gundams. So they were trying to implement a lot of these vehicle-based designs, and a lot of them were like motorcycle-esque. really prevalent in this entire series midway onwards. At first we see them at first and they were like kind of stupid and dumb. Oh, it'll go away. No, it does not go away. It gets bigger and worse. Although those vehicles and the suits are they are formidable. Feels very gimmicky and hokey at times when you see them. So without further ado, let me just show you a couple of them. I think here's a really good example of what I'm talking about. Now, because of these forced designs and so forth, it really changed a little bit of the scripting for Tomino, and he did not like it at all. It frustrated him. And I guess it compounded all his depression and so forth. So you get like these bikes that would fight against like the Victory Gundam. You have the Twin Rad bike tires. You'll see a lot of these bike tire things. I don't think I'm going to have... Let me try and see if I can find another. Is this another one of those ships? Nope, that's a regular one. I think it's another... Yeah, here we go. Here's one of the other ships, the Astrea. They very rarely say its name. But then it turns into this on Earth. Yeah. It's a big battleship on wheels. Come on. God. It's a terrible design. By the way, with the Twin Rad right here, suits actually can get into here and they'll ride it, and somehow it provides them absolute protection. Some of them are pretty like crazy. I think this is another one here. Yeah, here's another one. This is a smaller version of the Astrea that I had showed you already. This is a slightly smaller. Like Astrea would have been like this. Like it's actually huge. And then there are these like little mini bikes alongside with it. God. Why? I think there's another one, right? There's another one, but it's just a double shot. I think there was a Castillo. No. Enrad, I think, is another one of those bike ones, right? Yeah, this is a single tire one for a single suit. And then you have the Twin Rad, which can house 2 suits. We'll do one more look, and that's it. No, that's I clicked on that one. So, another thing with this one, too, very similar to like how F91 is, there's a lot of ugly suit designs. Zanskar Empire borrows a lot, what I feel is a lot of like designs from the Crossbone Vanguard, Chasma Babylonia suits. A lot of them have that, double eye thing. The funny thing with these suits, and let me just pull up the Zolo. This is one of the first earlier suits that we see here. Let me see if I can Asher colors. Yeah, it gives it a little more pronounced. These eyes, they kind of like, so they're kind of like slant, right? But they open up and they have like these like snake eyes almost. And they make reference to this at times to calling like fox eyes and stuff like that, which makes sense because if you look into like kind of like Japanese lore, forgive me if I'm wrong here or not, but from what I understand, like Japanese lore or whatnot, like with kitsunes and stuff like that, a lot of the characterizations with foxes would have like kind of like the small slantish eyes, like they're sly, they're cunning and clever and stuff like that. Good examples would be like in Legends of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. You have the Keaton mask. You can look at Animal Crossing. Red, who sells you like artwork and statues and stuff like that. Who's a shifty character himself because sometimes sells you duplicate junk basically, but has that slanting eyes. And then I guess I've seen this in like some anime. I can't think off the top of my head. Maybe like Inuyasha, maybe where the slant eyes can become wide. It's like they become like they've been revealed, or like they're trying to be even more sneaky or whatnot. And you can see the eyes open, and then there's a slant pupil basically. So a lot of the Zanskar suits feature this mechanic here. A lot of them are pretty ugly too. So like for example, the Zolo, there's a lot of transforming suits. But it's kind of weird because they have like top and bottoms, for an example. Let me show you another one. Tomlin. It's going to look very similar to the Zolo. And we the Zolot right here. So you see what I mean? Like they look almost the same design. They all have different utilizations though, but I'm not a huge fan of a lot of them. I think this is these 2 suits here. So we have the Ricontillo, Looks like a matador almost, which is kind of cool looking. Short-lived suit. And then the Goletariat is a formidable suit, but ugly designs. I think a lot of these suits are just plain old ugly. I showed you a picture of it earlier, but here's a shock shoe. And I don't think anything else is worth really mentioning here. Recarl. It's like a mobile armor-based ship. And then I haven't shown anything of the League Military or the Earth Federation, so some of the suits are not actually that bad looking. So we get the Gun Easies and Gun Blaster. Gun Easies right here. Not bad looking. It's very bulky kind of looking. For actually a formidable suit. And then we get the later upgrades of the Gun Blaster. Both of these are prominently used between the Strike team members and then Odello and Tomas. And then we get, of course, let me pull up the victories here, because I really do like, it's kind of Captain Obvious, but Victory Gundam and the V2, V2, and the V2 are my favorite suits in this entire series. I almost want to say I like the Victory Gundam more than I like the V Gundam, or the V2. Weird enough, I just love the simplicity of the Victory Gundam. It's got a lot of smooth designs behind it. In the Core Fighter transformation, let me see if I can get to the Core Fighter. So, like, Core Fighter looks pretty cool and neat. And then how it transforms and utilizes each function. It looks weird like this, but this is actually the beam shields, and the arms are folded up in this way. And, of course, the legs right here. I feel like the leg portions are the most useless when it's transformed. But I love the overall design and look. I wish we could see the back of it. I love the verniers on the back. It's got this like a crescent, and then you got the ports for the exhausts. I love the design for the Victory itself. Did I pull up the hex units? Yeah, here we go. So, I mean, between the hex unit, let me try and see if I can get it a little bit more even out so it's like a good little compare and contrast. You're not really going to see a whole lot of difference between the Victory Gundam and the Hexa, because the only real difference between the two is just the head unit. In fact, I like to call them rabbit ears. They look kind of cool. Untraditional of the Gundam, but I still like it. The Hex unit is no more different than the Victory Gundam. Same armament, same capabilities. That's the other thing I liked about this series too, before I talk more about the V2, is that the Victory Gundam itself, going right back to my realism conversation too, it goes right back to the original Gundam. I wouldn't say the original Gundam itself, but this is a mass-produced Gundam. This is a suit that's easily destroyed. Like, it's not invulnerable. It's not impervious to like machine gun fire when I like the original Gundam. In fact, a lot of times, many portions of this Gundam, because they use a lot of the upper torso and the boots, are constantly destroyed. In the mobile suit mode, its arm gets like mangled or wrecked. Its legs keep getting shot off. Like, this is a suit that's easily destroyed. And I think I really appreciate that a lot, because it gives a lot of that realism, that thrill in a sense of like, oh my gosh, you know, like, you can die. And Uso's not the only one that pilots the Victory, because later on, this suit gets mass-produced. We get a ton of Hexa units and a few of the Victory units themselves too. Victory units as in the Core Fighter. I mean, like, the Hexa units use the exact same system. The only difference is just the head's a little different. But honestly, it's like, yeah, it's really, really, like, I think it's the simplicity, the casualness. I think there's something about production suits are really cool, and the Victory Gundam outshines a lot of the other mass-produced suits in this entire series. I want to even show you. I'll show you the V-Dash. I think they ever call it the V-Dash. I only know it's called the Dash because of the game I play on my mobile. But it has these beam cannons on the back for the most part. It's pretty cool. I've never seen it supposedly has this machine gun, which I've never seen. I think it's part of the MSV portion. Yeah, probably. But yeah, I just wanted to show you that. But of course, the other one too is the V2. V2, Uso doesn't do as much crazy stuff with the V2 as he did with the original Victory Gundam, but the V2 is a really cool design. I love, like, of course, the V itself. The light wings it produces are really cool. And a lot of the similar, it has a lot of similar functions and features like the Victory Gundam, although it's just faster and a little bit of a, not a little bit, but more of a different design. Here's the Core Fighter. Core Fighter is a lot more of a sleeker design, not as kind of like bulky as the other one is. Top isn't terribly that great, and then of course we have the bottom. But it's kind of sad because Uso does a lot of those fun fighting techniques earlier on in the series, midway through. Once we get to the V2, though, he stops doing a lot of... We do see some crazier stunts to get out of like dangerous situations, but not to the same level as the Victory Gundam. And I just want to throw out just some of the other looks of the Victory Gundam too. So yeah, like you have the Buster mode, which has a long-range beam rifle. We seldomly use... You only use like the beam spray, like maybe like once or twice. The assault armor is super cool looking, makes the Gundam look more like a Valkyrie. And that's another thing too, they kind of have themes around angels and stuff like that towards the very end. So the Victory Gundam has more of this Valkyrie-esque look. And it's weird that I use the word Valkyrie, not like a Viking or whatnot, because it goes with some other themes too, kind of tying him back with the whole mothers and children, and it goes with the whole motherhood kind of thing, and like the children are seen kind of like angels almost. They don't really talk too much about it. It's like alluded a lot of times, and I picked it up much more on this watch than I did before. Then again, before when I had watched it, I wasn't paying too much of attention. I'm paying 100% attention here, so a lot more picked up on here. And then of course the final suit, we get the whole shebang. So, so that's all I have to pretty much say about my favorite suits of the series here. For the most part, a lot of them are ugly suit designs. There are some cool ones, and definitely the Victory and the V2 are my favorites. In particular, V2 in the assault armor is probably my favorite. Other than that, it brings me to my next segment here, which is, I'm new to Gundam. Should I start with this first? I had to think about this one for a while, and I'm going to say this passively. Yes. Start with Victory Gundam first if you like. The reason I say this is some of the earlier reasons I brought up regarding this series overall. This series is very easy to jump into. You don't need to watch any of the previous series to jump in here to get an understanding of what's going on here. It's a self-contained story. The only thing that referenced back to prior series is the concept of new types, but that's kind of like talked or alluded to throughout the entire series itself, so nothing that you're going to be missing out on if you haven't watched the previous series. You don't get a whole lot of new type madness either, so you're not going to be confused here. And this series has one of the most, if not a lot, and redone and pronounced, even highly emphasized themes that are core to the Gundam franchise. So this is definitely something I would passively say, yeah, go for it. The reason I say passively and not actively say, like, yes, watch this series as your first, is that it's because I do have still some issues with the series, just overall as enjoying it as a series, not as a Gundam series, right? But if you want to start in the Gundam franchise, you could definitely start on this first. I don't see any issues, why not? Alrighty then. With all that said, Victory Gundam is one of the top contenders for the most bleakest series in the entire Gundam franchise, and is definitely one of the bleakest in the UC timeline. Tomino returns the form here with the writing and direction with Victory Gundam that drives hard a lot of the core themes of the entire Gundam franchise. But even with the gritty story and the non-stop action that our characters constantly face every single episode, the series often does get dragged down by the pacing and confusing character motivations in its ever-changing plot. Mobile Suit Victory Gundam gets a solid, highly praised 3 out of 5. Now, I know some people are going to go like, well, Zaku, why did you give it a 3 out of 5? You talked a whole lot about good things about it, and it's 3 out of 5. I didn't tell you what I originally rated this series when I had watched it the first time around, and when I watched this series, it got a 2 out of 5. It pretty much almost got a 1 because I thought it was garbage. I couldn't get behind it. But then again, I wasn't fairly watching the series. I was playing games and hanging out with friends, and I had this in the background. So I wasn't giving it a fair shot. Now with me doing my reviews right now, I am 100% paying attention to it. I am utilizing all my film capabilities and when I'm picking out all these like themes and subtle nuances and stuff like that. I have a finer respect and admiration for this series. And especially following alongside the UC timeline here, lots of respect for it. I give it a very high 3 out of 5. Like, it could have been a 4, but like I mentioned earlier in the review here, a lot of the critical issues I had with the pacing and character motivations, or mannerisms essentially, and behaviors, really wrecked the series for me. Because these are main characters, they tend to drag on the plot, and the plot already drags itself from time to time, especially transitioning over from one arc to another arc. It just feels like a drag a lot of the time. So, if the series had been, a little bit more condensed down, cut down, either we had fixed a lot of the characterizations with Katajina, Chronicle, and Shakti, either reduce some of their screen time or reduce some of the moments that we're trying to make pivotal for them, and played it out without those moments, I think the series could have gone on a 4. It would have been a very low 4 though, but I could not justify myself saying this is a 4 out of 5. It definitely is a 3 out of 5 series. I highly recommend this as a watch, though. This is definitely entertaining, and definitely one of the most depressing, bleakest Gundam series I've seen, besides Iron Blood Orphans and Zeta Gundam. I do have to say, if you do watch this series, as you progress through it, just be prepared, because it is a very... It's downright depressing. It beats you over the head with it, and it makes you cry. I'm not joking about the crying part. So, I mean, you obviously heard that portion of that too. So, I think this is a good series on its own. But yeah. With everything wrapped up here with Victory Gundam, I do want to say this as well. If you are watching this on Twitch, make sure to follow me on my Twitch channel. If you are watching this on YouTube, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about Victory Gundam. Did you like the series? Did you dislike the series? What did you think about my opinions on it? Did it help you out? Did it inspire you to go watch this? Leave me something down below. Tell me what you think. I love to hear from you guys, and I definitely would love to respond to you guys. I love to respond to you guys more in live chat, though, but I'll definitely respond to comments. And, of course, if you want to keep updated about when I'm going live and so forth, follow me on my Twitter. On my Twitter account, I announce when I'm going live, what I'm reviewing next, and I post random things here and there. So with that said, I do want to thank you guys for watching this episode of Nerdy Reviews, and until the next review, see you next time.